It's time to talk about my 10 favorite books of 2025. It feels like every single book I read and every single video I make throughout the year leads to this moment where I sit down and figure out what are my top 10 best books that I read all year. And I am so excited to share these with you today. Similar to last year, there's gonna be a range of genres represented here. I have a couple literary fiction, a couple fantasy, of course, some mystery, thriller, and horror books all included within this list. And this year I do have two honorable mentions that I also want to give a little shout out to before getting into the top 10. So to start with the honorable mentions, the first one is Penitence by Kristen Koval. This is a book that made it into my best books of the year so far video that I do halfway through the year, and I thought that it was gonna make it all the way through and end up being in my top 10 best of the year, but I did have one late entry that I just read in the month of December, and I had to swap something out, and this was the one that got pushed to the bottom. But I still think this is such a great book. I did read this earlier in the year, and when I was reading it, it was also around a similar time that show Adolescence came out on Netflix and was very popular, and I really enjoyed that show, and I really enjoyed this book, and I think they have a lot of similar themes and commentary and open up similar discussions. So if you like that show, I feel like that was one of the big shows of the year. This is definitely a book that I think would be worth checking out as well. I would say this book is a literary fiction, psychological suspense type of story. You're following this family and the fallout after one of their children kills the other child. And it's not so much a story of a whodunit, because you know who did it, but you don't know the why and how all of the things will play out after that. And it's really just following these psychological studies of how that's affecting the different family members. The mother ends up calling in a lawyer to help work on the case, and it's actually her first love. And so that's bringing back all these things from her past coming into the story too. And it explores just all these deep, thoughtful questions about forgiveness and the choices people make, if you can ever move on from something like this, and this concept of you being more than the worst thing you ever did. And I think it was just a really fascinating book, really well written. It's definitely one that I would highly recommend. My other honorable mention is a romance, and that is We Met Like This. This is Casey West's adult romance debut. I used to read Casey West young adult books way back in the day, and this year she decided to come out with her first adult romance story, and I absolutely love this book just as much as I used to love her YA romances. In this story, you're following a woman named Margot, who is a literary agent who is living in LA, which is kind of unique because most of the publishing world takes place over on the East Coast in New York. And a lot of the story is really about her trying to find footing in her career as a functional adult and just really, figuring herself out. And along with that, this romantic interest comes into her life named Oliver. And it's a guy that she met before. They went on one date a long time ago, and it kind of never got off the ground. They had like a great makeout session, but they didn't continue seeing each other after that. So it's a little bit of a second chance romance too. And you watch their romance develop as she's figuring out her life. I love the connection between these two characters and their banter and just watching their relationship develop. But even more so, I just really appreciated Margot as a main character. She is portrayed very authentically. She is very messy. She is making some terrible choices. And she's just a character who is so fun to follow. You can't help but want to root for her, even though you may be totally disagreeing with some of the decisions that she's making, especially earlier in the book. This definitely felt on the caliber of an Abby Jimenez type of romance, which is like top tier for me. So I'm really excited to see what Casey West does next, because I know she has another adult romance novel coming out, and I will definitely be checking it out. Now we can move into my top 10. These are not going to go in any particular order. I cannot possibly imagine ranking these. I think the way I listed these is generally what I read earliest in the year to most recently in the year. First up is a book called Good Material by Dolly Alderton. This is a literary fiction novel that I ended up reading for a reading vlog very early in the year. In January, I did a vlog where I was reading the New York Times 5 best fiction books of the year prior. And out of those 5 books, I ended up with 2 favorite books of 2025. So this is the first one. And this is the story following this guy after he's going through a breakup with a girl that he really thought was the one. Typically, following a breakup story, you might be used to seeing that from the woman's perspective and her going on this journey of self-empowerment and rediscovering herself. So it was interesting to follow this and follow a man's perspective after a breakup. And he is just really lost on how he even got to this point, and he's just trying to pick up the pieces and figure out how to go on. He is a stand-up comic, hence the title, Good Material. He uses these tragedies in his life as material for his sets. And it's really not a book with a significant amount of plot. You're really just following this person, slice of lifestyle through this part of their life that they're going through, but it is so well executed. It is so raw and so authentically human and so unbelievably relatable. I feel like Dolly Alderton has somehow lived a million lifetimes to be able to so perfectly package the human experience in these moments of dialogue and introspection, and it is just so readable. It's a book that you don't want to put down. By the end, there's a little thing that happens too, and I immediately was like, I want to read 300 more pages of this story. It was just so captivating and a very universal type of story. So I feel like I would recommend this really to anyone, and I definitely want to read more from this author in the future. The other book that was featured in that video that made it into my top 10 of the year is James by Percival Everett. This is a reimagining of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, coming from the perspective of the enslaved man Jim's perspective. I definitely read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn way back in the day in school at some point, but I did not have distinct memories of that story, and it is not required to go into this book. However, I did brush up a little bit on just trying to ground myself in that story, just reading a little bit online before going into this, and I think that is at least a good experience to have before you go into it. Just makes you appreciate the story a little bit more. It really makes you appreciate what this book is doing and how it's flipping the story on its head by taking this different perspective, following this character, giving him the spotlight, giving him so much more agency in this version of the story than he got in the original. And I will say I'm typically hesitant to go into a story where you're following the perspective of an enslaved man, or it's in the antebellum South and you know there's going to be a lot of difficult, heavy topics and just these scenes that just frustrate you so much. It's a difficult period to revisit, but it's obviously important things to revisit, important things that still matter a lot in our present day today. And I think this story did a really excellent job of creating a story with such a sense of adventure that it really captivates you and pulls you into the story and makes for a really fun read at times too. You know, it's not just this dark, upsetting story. There's really this sense of adventure and this power in rediscovering this character's agency and exploring things like language and the power of language. It just tells a really great story. I immediately felt like this was an instant classic when I read it. I feel like it should be studied in schools alongside the original text. It was so impressive, so fun. It won so many awards last year, and it definitely deserved to, because it really is truly like the perfectly executed novel. Next up, from one of my all-time favorite authors, we have Wild Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaghy. Charlotte McConaghy writes literary fiction novels that have themes of environmentalism and usually have some kind of mystery through line going through the plot as well. And they are all so excellent. Cannot recommend them enough. This year, Wild Dark Shore came out, and it should be no surprise that it made it on my top 10 list. This story is set in a small island off the coast of Antarctica where this family is there as the last remaining people on the island, taking care of the island, and particularly taking care of a seed bank on the island, which is a place that preserves and stores all different types of seeds in the face of climate change so that eventually these seeds can be moved to more inhabitable lands and continue to reforest and repopulate with plants and trees and fruits and vegetables and whatnot. Then one day a storm comes and a woman mysteriously washes to shore, and the story follows the relationship between this woman and this family and the secrets they're harboring from one another as they are spending the last couple of weeks on the island before the ship eventually will come that is taking them off the island, because the island will soon also be uninhabitable. There are so many things that just function so well in the story. One of the elements is the ticking clock element, that there's this countdown going on throughout the story, that you know the effects of climate change are coming and putting them at risk, putting the island at risk, putting the seed bank at risk, and waiting to get to this moment when the boat's supposed to come to take them away. You have this mystery element of why this woman washed up to shore, why is she here in particular, what secrets might she be keeping and what might they be keeping from her, and the tension between all of that. And then just a lot of emotional explorations, all the things these different characters are going through, explorations on how you cope with your own trauma and second chances in life, and what you do with your time at the end of the world, and do you still choose to live in the face of just disaster all around you. So excellent. top tier, masterclass at writing. It just feels like anything this author comes out with will make it into my top books of the year in perpetuity because they are perfect. Next on my list, I had to just spotlight a series because it wouldn't make sense to just pick one book from the series. And that is the Kindred's Curse Saga by Penn Cole. This year, I got caught up on the series and I read the first, second, and third book. We are still awaiting the fourth book. I don't know when it will come out, if it will be in 2026 or 2027. Hopefully not any later than that, but I am so eagerly awaiting the conclusion to this series because I just had such a great time with it this year. Currently, I am absolutely all consumed by Heated Rivalry, the show on HBO, which is an adaptation of a book series. It's a hockey rivals to lovers, male-male romance that is just literally one of the best things I've ever seen on TV. These actors are incredible. The coloring and the lighting is incredible. The music is incredible. Like every shot feels so intentional. Every small movement on the actors' faces feels intentional. I'm just so completely obsessed with this show. And the Kindred's Curse Saga, while it has almost nothing in common with the storyline of Heated Rivalry, is one of those things I can look back on this year that gave me those similar feelings of just being so enraptured in a romantic story. There's certain character romances that just make you feel alive, you know? You just feel so invigorated by these characters' love story and you're rooting for them so hard. And that's how I felt with the Kindred's Curse Saga. The first book, I will say, was not my absolute favorite. I really enjoyed the second book and the third book a lot, so that's why I really felt the need to spotlight just the series as a whole rather than to pick just the second book or just the third book. That wouldn't really make as much sense for a video like this. This is a fantasy series set in this world where there are these people called the Descended, who are the descendants of the gods, and then the mortals is everyone else. Your main character is this mortal named Diem Bellator, and she has been raised to hate and fear the Descended. They're very opposed from one another. The Descended don't like the mortals don't like the Descended. And then the story kicks off when Diem's mother goes missing, and for reasons that are explained in the book, she ends up getting pulled into the world of the Descended after this and gets a lot closer to them as she's trying to uncover what happened to her mother. And of course, the main love interest is a Descended man, and that's going to create all kinds of conflict. But this romance is just such a fun, absolute slow burn, yearning fest situation. I love yearning and longing and tension and just really drawn out slow burn romances. And this book does that really well. On top of all of the world building and fantasy things that are happening and just the arc that Diem's character goes through as she moves along the books, there's a pretty big change that happens between book 1 and 2 that really just raises the stakes and changes a lot for her. There's competition elements, there's magic, of course, since it's a fantasy story, and it's just been a really fun series to follow. I flew through these books so fast, and I'm not a huge series reader, so that means a lot when a fantasy series really captures my attention, and I am just desperately waiting for this fourth book to finally come out. Next up is a thriller that I had a lot of fun with this year, and that is The Retirement Plan. This I would categorize as a more rompy thriller. It's very silly and fun. There's hijinks and shenanigans. It's just a really good time. In the story, you're following these older adults who are all friends. They're all married couples, and one of the woman's husband dies, and then she realizes that he had this huge life insurance policy that she gets after he dies, and now she's just set up for life. She's gonna go move to the beach and get this nice house and just have this beautiful lifestyle, and all the other women immediately get jealous and they're like, how can we make this work out for us? They find out their husbands have huge life insurance policies too, and that's when they start their retirement plan, which would involve killing their husbands so that they can get their life insurance policies. But what they don't know is that the husbands have their own things going on in their world too. And the story is sort of a cat and mouse style story, just following them as they're making these moves against one another and seeing who's gonna come out on top. Absolutely ridiculous concept, but it was so fun to follow. I love thrillers like this. I feel like this would be really fun to watch on the screen too, whether it was a movie or a TV show. And if you like the same style of silly, fun thrillers that I usually do, I would definitely recommend giving this one a try. If you want a thriller that is a little bit more dark, a little bit more serious, maybe even a little bit scary and creepy to read, I would recommend The Man Made of Smoke by Alex North. Alex North is an author that I really enjoy. I always give his books 4 or 5 stars. This one was a 5-star, made it to the favorites of the year. And in this story, you're following this man who had a creepy, close encounter with a serial killer back in his youth. Now, all these years later, he's moved on in life, has tried to move on, but now his dad has gone missing and he thinks it may have some connection to the serial killer. And so he decides to go back to the small island that he grew up on, where his dad was from, and to try to figure out what happened to his dad and see if there is connections with that serial killer going on. And this book was just so fun. If you like a small town murder mystery thriller type of story, just with this like eeriness, darkness over it, the serial killer who you don't know if they've been caught, getting to know people in the town, not knowing who you can trust, just the eerie atmosphere, I definitely recommend checking this out. On top of all of that, I really enjoyed just the exploration of how this character has gone on with his life since this happened, understanding the dynamic between him and his father and just how they've carried the weight of this experience differently throughout their lives. It's super well written. It definitely creeped me out at times. And it's just a good, classic, small town thriller that really checks all the boxes. If you're a fan of horror, you have probably heard about When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy this year, because I feel like this is making it on the top of so many people's lists, and it definitely deserves that spot. I've really been enjoying Nat Cassidy's works. I've read several of his novels and his novella. I think everything he's published at this point I've read, and this definitely stands out on top, but I still really enjoy all of them, so I recommend checking out anything from him. If you have read any of them and you like them, keep reading more from him. He's really great. This story I was a little bit hesitant to pick up because this is a werewolf story, and that is just not something I gravitate towards in my horror books. I'm not really a creature feature type of person, but I was hearing this book get really great reviews and that there's like the surprise element to it, so I just trusted it. I trusted that Nat Cassidy hasn't let me down before, and he did not let me down here either. This book is so fun, definitely unique, definitely so much more than just a werewolf story, but you can't say too much without giving away spoilers. It's really best to just go into this book and be along for the ride and the adventure that it takes you on. It's a function of the story, but it's also a function of the writing, that it just has these like choppy, fast sentences, and it really keeps you hooked in the story and wanting to see what's going to happen next and how is this crazy story going to unfold. So it's a really fun experience. It's a really great story. If you haven't been convinced yet from hearing everyone else rave about it this year, hopefully this will seal the deal for you and make you go out on the limb and give it a shot, because it will definitely be worth it. My other favorite horror book from the year was What Hunger by Catherine Dang, and this is another book that I was hesitant on, that I almost didn't pick up, but the publisher happened to send me this copy to try out, so I decided to give it a chance, and then I absolutely ended up loving it. This is a young adult coming of age story where you're following this girl who is the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants. You're following her the summer before she goes into high school, and her family is struck with a tragedy, and that mixed with other experience she's having, just being like a 14-year-old girl getting ready to go into high school, this transition between girlhood to teenagehood to womanhood, also just the experience she's having being the daughter of immigrants. It's all converging in this moment and just drives her to this point of female rage, and she ends up having this insatiable desire and craving for meat. And that concept just didn't hook me before picking the book up, because I was like, oh, I've read books like that before, and you know, I don't think they're my favorite thing. I don't resonate with them very much for some reason. I'm just like not interested in another book like that. But this one really did something different for me, and it was so good. It was written so well. I connected to this character so fast. I love following her story. There's so much going on in the story too, between like the cultural significance of her connection to meat and the generational trauma that has been passed down to her, and just how she's coping and how her family's coping in the midst of all of this going on. Truly just a really excellent, very well executed book. And I feel like it's encouraged me to give more stories like this a chance, where I'm like, oh, I don't know, I feel like I've read something before, maybe it wasn't my favorite thing. Because if anything, this book taught me that books can always still surprise me, and here it is, ending up in my top 10 favorite books of the year. For my cozy mystery fans out there, you absolutely have to pick up the Marigold Cottages Murder Collective by Joe Nichols. This was my favorite cozy mystery of the year. It is set in this community of these cottages that are all together, that are all owned by the landlady named Mrs. B, and she rents these cottages out to all these different people. But she's very selective about who she allows to rent her spaces. She really likes to connect with her residents, get to know them. And so she's ended up with quite an eclectic bunch of people. And she even like lets people pay less money for the rent, just given circumstances. She's just like a dream landlord. And one day, one of the people she allows to move in is this guy who's known to be this potentially violent ex-convict, and everyone's a little bit hesitant about it. They're like, oh, what's Miss B doing? Letting this person move into the community? It's not a good idea. And then very shortly after, someone ends up murdered in the community and he gets arrested. And they're like, see, that was a terrible idea. But then Mrs. B, who is convinced that she knows her people, decides that he didn't do it, and to protect him, she's gonna say that she committed the murder, and so she ends up going to jail for it. And because of that, all of the members of the community end up coming together to try to figure out who actually committed this murder so that they can clear Mrs. B's name, because they don't believe that she ever would have done that. It's such a fun group of misfit characters, unlikely friendships, and it's just so charming. It's so well written. It is funny and cozy and emotional and heartwarming and all of the things. And I do think this is going to be continued into a series, so very excited to pick up the next book. I had such a good time with this, and if you just like a good classic cozy mystery, if you like fun cast of characters coming together, I definitely recommend checking this out. And last, but certainly not least, is a late entry. I just read this book at the beginning of December. It just had time to make it onto the list, and I had a really good feeling about it. I just felt like this could be a favorite book of the year, so that's why I wanted to squeeze it in right at the last minute, and I'm so glad I did, because here it is, it made it onto the list, and that is The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. I have read several books from Alex E. Harrow in the past. I've completed some of her books. I have DNF'd some of her books for various reasons. And I've just sort of had like a varied experience where I like the concept of her books. I like her writing in pieces, but for some reason I haven't fully attached to a story of hers yet. And this one fully consumed me. One of the things that I've been looking for lately is more lady night stories. That's just something I'm interested in exploring, especially after really enjoying Caitlin Starling's novel earlier this year. It's just had me hungry for more lady night stories. And that's when I started hearing about The Everlasting along with a couple other books. And this is the one that just seemed the most interesting to me. And of course, I ended up absolutely loving it. Since I just read this book, this is my first time pitching it, and it's kind of complex, so bear with me here. At a high level, I'll say this is a fantasy story that traverses time, and it follows this really epic love story. Your main characters are this guy named Owen, who is an academic who's really interested in the history and the lore and the story of this lady knight from his country's past who is named Sir Una Everlasting. When the story begins, he is tasked with the job of translating this historical text that is this like sacred book that no one's ever seen, that he gets the opportunity to look at, and he's supposed to translate the story from this government official who's pulling him in on this task. But what he really gets pulled into is going back in time, traveling back in time to meet her and be along with her in her journey, making sure that she completes her quest in the way that she's supposed to finish the tale. So because he's so dedicated to the story and he knows everything, that's why they decide to send him, since he knows how everything's supposed to go, to assist her along in her quest. But the thing is, in this quest and story, he knows she dies at the end of it, which becomes super unfortunate for him when he begins to fall in love with her. I don't want to say too much more about the plot and give extra stuff away, because that's about what I knew going into the book, and I was really pleased with how grand the story gets and how it builds from that moment. But I just have to say, this is one of the best written books I've ever read. It is truly spectacular writing. I can flip to any page in the story, open it, and pick a sentence at random to read, and you'd be like, wow, that is an excellently crafted sentence. Because of that, it does have sort of a dense reading experience. It looks like a short book. I think it comes in under 300 pages, but it takes a long time to read because you really soak into the experience of it. Every sentence is beautiful, and so you don't want to feel like you're rushing through it. It's truly so impressive, and it has such a tone to it that it feels like you're being told this like grand, epic fairy tale. It's like a bedtime story that you're being told. And then you get pulled in the love story with them and it feels like just this epic, huge thing. You've got like lifetimes with these characters and oh my God, it's so good. It is so good. This book completely satisfied what I was looking for in a lady night story, but then also just did so much more with this epic love story. I love an epic love story. I love yearning and longing and hardships and stories told through time. It just packs together so many things that I enjoy so much in books. And it's giving me a high bar to go into next year looking for great books. Now coming off of this one, I'm like, how is anything going to compete for a while? I don't know. But that is it for my list of my favorite books of 2025. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of my favorite books and what you thought about them. And definitely let me know if I convinced you to pick up any of my favorites today. That is definitely my goal with this video, to share these books that I just want to shout from the rooftops about, that I just think are perfect, excellent, wonderful books that more people should be reading. So I'd love to hear if you've decided to pick any of them up as well. And you can also let me know what your favorite or a couple of your favorite books were from the year as well. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.